You hear it at dinner tables, in bedrooms, across texts that land with the weight of a closed door. Someone asks if everything's okay. The answer comes fast. It's fine, but the jaw is tight. The smile doesn't reach the eyes. The body tells a story the mouth refuses to speak. Why do people do this? What happens inside a brain that says one thing while feeling another? And what price do we pay when words and emotions split into separate tracks? One of three styles humans use when dealing with conflict. Passive speakers avoid confrontation, even when it costs them. They swallow grievances. They nod when they want to scream. In 2015, researchers Dumitru Filipeanu and Mihaela Cananau surveyed 1,000 office workers across Romania. 36% fell into the passive category, not aggressive, not assertive, just silent. But silence isn't neutral. It's a choice with consequences. A study from 2023 in the journal Frontiers in Psychology confirmed what therapists already knew. Passive aggression, saying fine when you're burning, is an action. It's strategic inaction, a refusal to engage in healthy behaviors, an invisible middle finger wrapped in politeness. Where does this come from? John Bowlby built the framework in 1969. Attachment theory. The bonds formed between infants and caregivers become templates for every relationship that follows. Secure attachment teaches children they can express distress and receive comfort. Avoidant attachment teaches the opposite. In 1991, researchers Jenkins and Smith found that children exposed to parental conflict who learned to suppress emotions developed behavioral problems. By 2002, Katz and Wooden published findings in child development showing that hostile detachment in marriages predicted children who withdrew rather than engaged. 52% of disorganized infants, those who approach caregivers but receive unpredictable responses, still seek comfort but learn to mask distress. The brain adapts. It learns that expressing need leads to rejection, so it stops expressing. But the need doesn't vanish. If you value documented psychology and neuroscience history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. Also, this script is researched and factual, using sources from PMC's Development and Validation of a Measure of Passive Aggression Traits, published in 2022, analyzing 95 items through Delphi surveys with counseling psychology professors and tracking genetic causal factors. Through longitudinal family studies and the communication styles and attention performance in primary school children's study from PMC, which administered the Assertive Behavior Scale for Children and Symbol Digit Modalities test to 77 participants aged 7 to 12, cross-referenced with D2 attention test performance metrics showing statistically significant correlations between communication style and cognitive function. Now back to the information. In 1983, sociologist Arlie Hochschild coined the term emotional labor in the managed heart. She described flight attendants paid to be far more positive than they felt, service workers forced to smile through abuse. But emotional labor isn't confined to the workplace. Rose Hackman's 2023 book, Emotional Labor Documents, how this burden falls disproportionately on women. Not because women are naturally better at managing emotions, neuroscientific research shows men possess equal capacity, but because society trains girls from childhood to prioritize others' comfort over their own truth. A girl who speaks her anger is aggressive. A boy doing the same is assertive. The double standard breeds silence. Levant has studied emotionally inexpressive men for 42 years. He starts lectures by asking if anyone knows a man who struggles to verbally express emotions. Hands flood the room, every time. Clinical psychotherapist. Orna Guralnik calls these little T traumas. The 1,000 cuts of being told, don't cry, don't be a baby, grow up, be a big boy. Each phrase teaches emotional shutdown, not a single catastrophic event, just steady erosion of permission to feel. 2023 research published in Nature Mental Health examined 147 adults aged 24 to 45 using the Trier Social Stress Task. Participants with low cortisol responses to acute stress showed a positive relationship between major life stress and psychological symptoms. Those with high cortisol responses showed no such pattern. Cortisol, often called the stress hormone, isn't the enemy, it's the body's adaptation mechanism. A blunted cortisol response signals a system that's given up, that no longer rallies to meet threats. The participants who said it's fine while their stress mounted had the weakest physiological defenses. 2014 research from the International Journal of Psychophysiology measured cardiovascular responses during emotional suppression. Participants told to hide negative emotions, while discussing disappointments showed elevated heart rate and blood pressure. But here's the twist. Their conversation partners, people who hadn't been asked to suppress anything, showed the same cardiovascular changes. Suppression is contagious. When you hide your truth, the person across from you feels it in their chest. pre-ejection period shortened, cardiac output dropped. Total peripheral resistance spiked. The body knows what the mouth denies. 47% higher for cardiovascular mortality. The numbers don't lie. When you consistently tell your nervous system that your emotions don't matter, your immune system listens. T-cell activity weakens. Inflammatory markers rise. A 1997 study by Pennebaker showed that people who suppressed trauma-related thoughts had measurably weaker immune responses. 2003 research in Psychosomatic Medicine Journal found elevated cortisol levels in chronic suppressors, not the adaptive spikes of acute stress, but the grinding elevation that impairs immune defense over time. fMRI studies from the University of Chicago's Clinical Neuroscience and Psychopharmacology Research Unit mapped neural circuits of aggressive behavior in 2017. When provocation occurs, the amygdala lights up. The prefrontal cortex should then regulate the response. But in people with histories of suppression, this regulation fails. A 2022 systematic review and meta-analysis in cognitive affective behavioral neuroscience examined 9 studies of aggression-prone individuals during anger-eliciting tasks. Compared to controls, suppressors showed increased activity in the left hippocampus, left amygdala, and left parahippocampal gyrus, limbic hyperactivity, the emotional brain screaming while the thinking brain pretends not to hear. December 2023. Research using 7 Tesla fMRI at MIT Press found that provocation activated the left posterior cerebellum, while aggressive behavior activated the right posterior cerebellum, distinct and lateralized. The brain maintains separate maps for feeling threatened and acting on that threat. People who say it's fine have learned to light up the first map while suppressing the second. A study from Scholar UTC examined psychological distress, attachment, and conflict resolution in romantic partnerships. Avoidance, the attachment style linked to emotional suppression, predicted psychological distress through conflict engagement patterns. The beta coefficient was 0.388 with p-value less than 0.001. Statistical translation: near certainty that avoiding emotional honesty damages mental health. Withdrawal partially mediated this relationship. Compliance did too. People who say fine to keep the peace don't keep the peace. They delay the inevitable breakdown. Research from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology in 1996 found that during conflict, avoidantly attached individuals engage in stonewalling. They refuse to respond. The silent treatment isn't passive, it's weaponized absence. Anxiously attached partners respond by pursuing, demanding. The dance of distancing and pursuing becomes the relationship's default choreography. 77% of couples with a dismissing avoidant man reported this cycle. Only 8% of other couples did, because observers expect it. When women express anger, they face professional penalties. When they hide anger, they experience emotional exhaustion. A 2023 study in the South African Journal of Industrial Psychology found that increased emotional labor results in decreased work engagement. Women leaders must manage their own emotions while monitoring and managing everyone else's. The cognitive load is crushing and measurable. Research from BMC Psychology in February 2024 used ecological momentary assessment to track emotional labor in real time. Women reported more instances of surface acting, displaying emotions they don't feel, than men. The effect compounds across lifespan. Women who learn in childhood to prioritize relational harmony over authentic expression carry that pattern into every boardroom and bedroom. In 2023, research from Simply Psychology, passive-aggressive behavior was characterized as indirect resistance to demands and avoidance of direct confrontation. It manifests as critical comments, sarcasm, cynicism, complaints about minor issues. Colonel William Menninger first described it during World War II. He observed soldiers exhibiting aggressiveness through indirect measures: procrastination, stubbornness, inefficiency. The military called it passive-aggressive personality disorder. The DSM eventually dropped it as a diagnosis. But the behavior didn't disappear. It evolved, moved into civilian life, became the texture of modern disconnection. According to 2023 research in psychopathology, there is a disconnect between stated emotion and physiological markers. Heart rate variability drops, skin conductance rises, pupil dilation increases. The autonomic nervous system registers threat even as the mouth forms words of reassurance. Partners sense this mismatch, not consciously perhaps. But the limbic system reads micro-expressions, vocal tone shifts, breathing patterns. A 2005 study on sensitization to angry faces used fMRI to track neural responses. The amygdala, nucleus accumbens, hippocampus, and hypothalamus activated when subjects viewed angry expressions. Passive processing of threat faces. The brain doesn't need words, it reads the body. So when you say fine through clenched teeth, your partner's brain receives 2 contradictory signals. The cognitive dissonance creates anxiety, not in the liar, in the listener. Research from World Journal of Biology, Pharmacy, and Health Sciences in 2024 reviewed how attachment in adults simultaneously relates to biomarkers of immunity. Individuals with avoidance attachment styles produce higher levels of pro-inflammatory cytokine interleukin 6 when reacting to interpersonal stress. Those with anxious attachment show elevated cortisol production and lower T-cell counts. The body keeps score. A study from Digital Commons Liberty University in 2024 examined childhood trauma and adult attachment. Anxiously attached adults who experienced neglect, abuse, or severe attachment disruptions exhibit high levels of relationship anxiety, emotional dependence, need for constant reassurance. Avoidantly attached adults withdraw, mistrust, emotional vulnerability, refuse to seek intimacy. Both groups struggle with the phrase, "what's wrong?" because answering honestly requires safety they never learned to expect. Catherine University in 2023 found that surface acting, showing fake emotions, takes more mental effort than deep acting, aligning behavior with genuine values. Psychology. Today reported that senior care facility staff turnover exceeded 70% in 2018. Jobs requiring tipping showed exacerbated mental health outcomes among women. Why? Because emotional labor depletes cognitive energy. Studies confirm that workers who perform emotional labor for extended periods make more mistakes, take longer to complete tasks, experience lower job satisfaction. The same mechanism operates at home. When you paste on a smile while fury churns beneath, you're using executive function to suppress automatic responses. That cognitive load has to come from somewhere, usually task performance, sometimes health. The International Journal of Mobile Communications conducted research showing that K is one of the most hated text messages to receive. More hated than sure or good for you. Why? Because it emphasizes lack of effort, literal time, 47 milliseconds to type. But the period at the end adds charge, signals disinterest, disengagement, the kind that accompanies passive-aggressive behavior, K period. Translation, I'm complying with your request for response while making clear I don't want to be here. It's fine lands in the same category, 2 words. 1 second to speak, maximum emotional distance. Prolonged emotional suppression elevates risks for cardiovascular diseases, autoimmune disorders, and gastrointestinal problems. 2011 research found that patients with irritable bowel syndrome reported significantly higher levels of emotional suppression, correlating with symptom severity. The gut-brain axis doesn't distinguish between interpersonal stress and physical threat. Chronic emotional suppression triggers persistent activation of stress pathways, sleep disturbances from increased arousal at bedtime, insomnia, non-restorative sleep. A 2024 study from the International Journal of Critical Thinking tracked emotional suppression patterns using supervised learning techniques and psychological scales. The findings confirmed that repressed emotions manifest in physical symptoms over time. The cardiovascular system takes the hardest hit. 2009 meta-analysis by Cheetah and Steptoe found chronic emotional suppression associated with significantly increased risk of cardiovascular disease, including hypertension and coronary heart disease. The mechanism involves the sympathetic nervous system, the gas pedal, as Harvard Health Publishing described it in April 2024. When the brain perceives danger, the hypothalamus releases corticotropin-releasing hormone. This travels to the pituitary gland, triggering adrenocorticotropic hormone release. That hormone reaches the adrenal glands, prompting cortisol release. The body stays revved. When threat passes, cortisol should fall. The parasympathetic nervous system, the brake, dampens the response. But people who chronically suppress emotions never hit the brake. The HPA axis stays activated, like a motor idling too high for too long. Eventually something breaks. February 2025. Research in the International Journal of Psychophysiology compared emotion suppression effects across cultures. Western populations, Americans, showed inflammation and adverse cardiovascular outcomes when suppressing emotions. Eastern populations, Japanese, showed no such correlation. Why? Display rules. Japanese culture incorporates indirect communication as normative. Americans are socialized toward directness. When Americans suppress, they violate their own cultural script. The internal conflict generates physiological stress. The cardiovascular system responds. Blood vessels sustain damage, arteries narrow, blood pressure rises, risk of heart attack and stroke increases. An article from SpringSource Center published April 2025 described how emotional labor and gendered expectations create a vacuum. Women express that caring for themselves, their family, and an adult partner is too much. They want a significant other to share the mental load. Be a true partner, not require more emotional labor. The phrase "it's fine" becomes survival strategy. a way to reduce immediate friction while resentment accumulates, but that resentment doesn't evaporate. Research from September 2025, published in MDPI, examined gender differences in emotional labor using the China Social Work Longitudinal Study. 5,965 participants. Women demonstrated stronger emotional regulation and derived greater work meaningfulness through professional efficacy. But under high role ambiguity, women experienced more burnout. Men did not. The difference? Women internalized the expectation that they must manage not just their own emotions, but everyone else's. 105 participants received either 20 milligrams hydrocortisone or placebo 30 minutes or 90 minutes before a cognitive reappraisal task. Rapid cortisol effects reduced emotional responsivity. Slow cortisol effects enhanced downregulation of negative emotions. On the neural level, rapid cortisol increased amygdala and dorsolateral prefrontal activation. Slow cortisol reduced it. Functional connectivity between these regions shifted. Translation: timing matters. Acute stress gives you tools to handle immediate threat. Chronic stress dismantles those tools. People who spend years saying fine while stress accumulates operate in permanent rapid cortisol mode. Amygdala hyperactivity, prefrontal exhaustion. The thinking brain can't override the emotional brain because it's running on fumes. March 2021. Research in European Journal of Neuroscience found cortisol promotes cognitive regulation of high-intensity emotions independent of timing. 85 healthy men received either 10 milligrams hydrocortisone or placebo 30 or 90 minutes before viewing negative images. Cortisol improved downregulation of high-intensive, but not low-intensive negative emotions. No difference between 30-minute and 90-minute delays. Conclusion: the body can mobilize resources for major threats. What it can't do is sustain mobilization indefinitely. Low-grade chronic stress, the kind generated by years of saying fine, doesn't trigger adaptive cortisol responses. It triggers systemic inflammation, the kind that predicts early mortality. Voice, direct, constructive communication predicted relationship satisfaction. Exit and neglect predicted distress. Loyalty, passively waiting for things to improve, showed mixed results. Men used loyalty more than women. Surprising, because cultural expectations suggest women should wait patiently. But the data showed men avoided direct confrontation through passive compliance at higher rates. Growth fear, the anxiety about personal development threatening relationships, predicted exit and neglect positively. Voice, negatively. People afraid that changing themselves will destabilize their relationships choose silence. It's fine becomes armor against vulnerability. Passive bystanders, people witnessing aggression without participating, activated regions linked to social and emotional processing. Prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, inferior frontal gyrus, posterior superior temporal gyrus. The social brain lights up during conflict even when you're not the target. Now imagine that conflict happens in your own relationship, daily. Your partner asks what's wrong, you say nothing. Your social brain registers the lie. Prefrontal regions activate to suppress the truth. Do this for years. The neural pathways for suppression become highways. The pathways for authentic expression become overgrown trails. Healthy men and women received either 30 milligrams cortisol or placebo 90 minutes before exposure to neutral and negative pictures. Behavioral and brain imaging data showed successful induction and downregulation of negative emotions via cognitive reappraisal and distraction. Cortisol enhanced regulatory activity in ventrolateral prefrontal cortex during distraction, reduced emotion-related amygdala activation during reappraisal. The medication didn't eliminate emotion, it supported regulation. The implications? When stress becomes chronic, the regulation system fails. Not because people lack willpower, because the neurobiological infrastructure collapses. Therapeutic interventions that restore HPA axis function, medication, therapy, stress reduction, can rebuild capacity for emotional honesty. Research from Greater Good magazine, published April 5, 2023, examined Rose Hackman's book on emotional labor. Hackman argues that in unequal societies, anyone with less power does way more emotional labor. Black men accommodate feelings of white men. Black men accommodate white women. Immigrant women provide emotional labor for white people, including white women. The pattern isn't personal, it's structural. Changing it requires systemic interventions. Workplace policies that acknowledge emotional labor, promote psychological safety. Support employee well-being. Relationships that distribute emotional responsibility equitably, where men aren't deciphering their partner's unspoken needs because their partners speak their needs directly, where women aren't managing everyone's comfort at the expense of their own truth. The data on positive versus negative outcomes is stark. February 17, 2023. Research in Nature Mental Health showed that cortisol response and positive affectivity moderated the stress-symptom relationship. Low cortisol response plus low positive affectivity predicted that life stress correlated with psychological symptoms. High cortisol response or high positive affectivity broke that correlation. You need either robust physiological resilience or strong positive emotion regulation, ideally both. People who say it's fine typically have neither. Their cortisol responses are blunted from chronic activation. Their positive affectivity is suppressed by years of prioritizing others. They're running on empty in both systems. November 10th, 2023, research from Simply Psychology identified 15 signs of passive-aggressive behavior. Sarcasm used to convey criticism without addressing underlying issues. Silent treatment as refusal to communicate. Evading issues by pretending everything's fine when it's not. Each behavior stems from reluctance to deal with emotions head-on. The study notes that passive-aggressive behavior can manifest as disconnect between words and actions, used consciously as manipulation, or stemming from fear of conflict and difficulty with direct communication. Most people doing it don't even know they're doing it. The neural circuits formed in childhood operate automatically, until something breaks them. A 2024 study from Healthline examining repressed emotions noted that childhood trauma is one possible cause. 2023 research found people who experience childhood trauma are more likely to have one or more chronic health conditions. The mechanism involves sustained activation of stress systems. Children who learn emotions are dangerous develop hypervigilant nervous systems. Those systems never fully relax into adulthood. The result? Higher inflammation, poorer immune function, increased susceptibility to illness. Not because they're weak, because their defense systems are exhausted from decades of unnecessary activation. Most studies focus on chronic negative emotions. Divorce, marital problems, bereavement, loneliness, all suppress immune function. But surprisingly, little research examines positive emotional states. The review noted that laughter therapy, subjects watching humorous films, upregulates genes involved in natural killer cell response. Granzymes, perforin, cathepsin, granulysin. Laughter significantly decreases pro-inflammatory cytokines in rheumatoid arthritis patients. Suppresses heightened growth hormone expression. The body responds to joy by strengthening defenses, responds to suppressed anger by dismantling them. Or is constant inflammation causing depression and cardiovascular disease? Where's the beginning of the vicious circle? The answer might be, it doesn't matter. Once the cycle starts, each component reinforces the others. Breaking it requires intervention at multiple points. Therapy to address attachment patterns, stress reduction to restore HPK axis function, social support to reduce isolation, physical health interventions to lower inflammation, medication when neurobiological systems need chemical support. Research shows Asian heritage populations tend toward indirect communication. Therapists observe that collectivistic cultures may be more attuned to nonverbal cues, more skilled at reading indirect signals. This could mitigate passive aggressiveness because people understand unspoken communication. Or it could amplify it because direct confrontation violates cultural norms. Cross-cultural studies in immigrant families show differential language fluencies create communication gaps. When one family member speaks directly and another speaks indirectly, both following their own cultural script, conflict becomes inevitable. Studies from Child Development and Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry found that marital hostility, hostile detachment, and conflict engagement patterns predict children's internalizing and externalizing behaviors. Patterns of marital conflict predict childhood anxiety and depression. When children witness parents saying fine while tension saturates the air, they learn that model. They internalize the disconnect between feeling and expression. Then they replicate it, not consciously. Neuroscience shows the brain builds working models from repeated experiences. Observing suppression trains neural circuits to suppress. The pattern transmits across generations, until someone breaks it. A study examining therapeutic interventions for attachment-based conflicts found that emotionally focused therapy helps couples recognize their dance of pursuit and withdrawal. Name it. Understand its origins. Choose different responses. Cognitive behavioral approaches teach emotion regulation skills. Dialectical behavior therapy adds distress tolerance. Mindfulness practices train awareness of the gap between stimulus and response. In that gap lives choice. You feel anger. Notice the anger. Pause. Decide whether to express it constructively, suppress it temporarily while you gather thoughts, or let it pass without action. The key word is decide. Conscious choice replaces automatic pattern. Harvard Health Publishing recommends relaxation response techniques, deep abdominal breathing, focus on soothing words, visualization, repetitive prayer, yoga, tai chi. Each method counters the stress response. activates the parasympathetic nervous system, hits the brake the body forgot how to use. Exercise helps. Studies show regular physical activity reduces inflammation, boosts mood through endorphin release, enhances immune cell activity. Adequate sleep is essential. Poor sleep increases stress and inflammation, weakening immune response. Balanced diet rich in omega-3 fatty acids has anti-inflammatory properties that benefit brain and immune system. The body can heal, but only if given resources and permission. Research from Harvard Health Publishing noted that confidants, friends, acquaintances, coworkers, relatives, spouses, and companions provide life-enhancing social nets that may increase longevity. The buffering theory holds that people who enjoy close relationships receive emotional support that sustains them during chronic stress and crisis. But here's the catch. If you've spent your life saying fine, you've trained people to take you at your word. They stop asking what's wrong because you've made clear you won't answer honestly. Breaking that pattern requires risk, saying I'm not fine, I need help, I've been lying to protect us both, and it's killing me. That vulnerability feels like death. Attachment theory explains why. If your childhood taught you that expressing need leads to rejection, admitting need as an adult activates those same terror circuits. But the alternative is dying slowly while everyone thinks you're fine. Research on emotional labor in professional settings shows that display rules, organizational expectations about which emotions to show, create constant regulatory demands. Customer service representatives must maintain positive tone with abusive customers. Healthcare workers must stay calm during traumatic situations. Teachers must project patience when exhausted. Leaders must appear confident when uncertain. Each job has unwritten rules. Break them at your professional peril. But following them depletes cognitive resources, leads to burnout. Staff turnover, decreased performance. Organizations that acknowledge emotional labor and build psychological safety retain workers and improve outcomes. Those that demand endless positivity without support watch employees crumble. Research suggests that because women experience more pressure to perform emotional labor, they need different support than men. Women's leadership programs teach boundary setting, assertive communication, how to express anger without professional penalty, how to refuse additional emotional labor without guilt. Men's programs teach emotional vocabulary, how to identify and name feelings beyond anger, how to ask for needs directly instead of expecting partners to read minds. Both groups need permission to say, not fine, and be believed. The neuroplasticity research offers hope. The brain isn't fixed. New experiences create new pathways. A lifetime of suppression built neural highways for inauthenticity. But consistent practice of honest expression builds new highways. fMRI studies show that cognitive behavioral therapy produces measurable changes in prefrontal cortex and amygdala connectivity. Mindfulness meditation thickens cortical regions involved in attention and emotional regulation. The brain rewires. Slowly, across months and years, but it rewires. People who spent 40 years saying fine can learn to say I'm angry and survive the experience. The terror subsides. The predicted rejection often doesn't materialize. And when it does, that reveals relationships built on your silence rather than your truth. Painful information. Necessary information. This often backfires because it feels like interrogation. Activates defensive patterns. Some partners give up, accept the fine at face value. This enables continued suppression. The healthiest response? Name the pattern without judgment. I notice you said you're fine, but your jaw is tight and you haven't made eye contact. I'm here when you're ready to talk. Then give space. Don't pursue. Don't pressure. Model the safety the suppressor never learned. Sometimes once, sometimes hundreds of times. Until the neural pathways of suppression weaken and pathways of trust grow strong enough to bear the weight of truth. Better health outcomes. Studies show that securely attached couples handle conflict through mutual focus strategies. Both partners' needs matter. Both express them. Both compromise. Insecurely attached couples fall into destructive patterns. Avoidant partners withdraw. Anxious partners pursue. The dance escalates until one person leaves or both accept misery as baseline. Breaking this requires what therapy calls earned security. You didn't learn it in childhood. You learn it in adulthood. Through new experiences with safe people, through therapy. Through conscious practice of behaviors, your nervous system finds terrifying. Each time you say what you really feel and survive, the terror diminishes. The truth becomes less dangerous, eventually more possible than the alternative. Every time you say it's fine when it's not, you teach people your words mean nothing. Your yes means maybe. Your no means ask again later. Your I'm happy means I'm performing happiness. Over time, this erodes trust. Not because you're a liar, because you're scared, but the effect is the same. People learn not to believe you. Then when you finally say something true, I'm leaving, I need help, I can't do this anymore, they dismiss it as another performance. You've cried wolf with pleasantries so long they can't hear your genuine cry. Inflammation rises. Immune function drops. Cardiovascular risk increases. Relationships hollow out. Authentic connection requires authentic communication. You can't be truly known if you're always hiding. Work performance suffers. Cognitive resources spent suppressing emotions aren't available for tasks. Creativity needs emotional honesty. Innovation requires risk. Risk requires trust. Trust requires truth. The chain breaks at its weakest link. For chronic suppressors, that link is the first word they learn to lie with. Fine. The research consistently shows that interventions work. Therapy reduces symptoms. Meditation changes brain structure. Medication restores neurotransmitter balance when needed. Social support buffers stress. Exercise reduces inflammation. These aren't vague recommendations. They're documented outcomes from peer-reviewed studies tracking hundreds or thousands of participants across months or years. The data says change is possible. Not easy, not quick, but possible. Notice it. Notice the feeling beneath it. Anger, perhaps, hurt, fear, exhaustion, then choose. Maybe the moment isn't safe for full honesty. That's fine, actual fine. You can say, I need time to think about that. Real information, or maybe you take the risk. You say I'm angry about what you said yesterday. 7 words. Volcano of vulnerability. Your nervous system screams danger, but you said it. The person hears it. Maybe they get defensive. Maybe they apologize. Either way, you survived speaking truth. The circuit weakens. Next time becomes easier. Not easy, easier. But lasting transformation, the kind that changes automatic responses in high-stress moments, requires sustained effort. People abandon the work because it's hard and results are slow. They return to familiar patterns of suppression. This is where social support becomes critical. A community that values emotional honesty, a partner who rewards vulnerability, a therapist who witnesses transformation. These relationships hold the space for change when you want to quit. The accumulated cost of suppression becomes unbearable. Others experience slower awakening, reading research like this, recognizing patterns, making small changes that compound. Either path works. Crisis often motivates faster change. Gradual awareness may create more stable transformation. The destination is the same, a life where you can say what you feel. Where it's fine means I'm actually okay. Where I'm not okay gets said when it's true. Where people believe you because your words match your experience. You won't always know what you feel. Sometimes emotions are complex, contradictory, unclear. The goal is honesty about that uncertainty. I don't know why I'm upset could be the most honest thing you say all week. It's information. Better than fine when you're confused and hurting. The research shows that even partial honesty, admitting you're struggling without explaining why, reduces physiological stress. Your nervous system registers the truth, even when details remain unclear. A 2014 study examining cardiovascular responses found that single instances of emotional expression during conflict produced immediate measurable benefits. Blood pressure normalized, heart rate steadied, peripheral resistance dropped, but these were acute effects. Chronic suppression requires longer intervention. Studies tracking therapy outcomes typically measure progress at 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. Significant changes emerge around 6 months. Sustained changes by 1 year. Brain imaging studies show structural changes after 8 weeks of daily meditation. But functional changes, how you actually respond in conflict, lag behind structural changes. Your brain has new capacity. Accessing it under stress takes practice. The ultimate finding from research across psychology, neuroscience, physiology, and attachment theory is this. The body is designed for truth. Suppression is expensive. It costs cortisol, immune function, cardiovascular health, relationship intimacy, cognitive resources, lifespan. These aren't metaphors. They're measurable outcomes from hundreds of studies involving tens of thousands of participants. The phrase, it's fine when it's not fine, is a symptom. The disease is a nervous system that learned safety requires invisibility. A brain that formed working models from caregivers who couldn't handle the child's authentic emotions. A culture that rewards false positivity and punishes honest distress. Teaching the brain new patterns. Rebuilding neural pathways that atrophied from disuse. Finding relationships and communities that make honesty possible. Challenging cultural scripts that demand endless emotional labor from those with less power. This work is personal and political. Individual and collective. You can't change society's expectations alone, but you can change your response to them. Stop saying fine when you mean I'm dying. Start with people who've earned the right to hear your truth. Build outward from there. A 2024 study analyzing emotional suppression mortality data from the General Social Survey National Death Index tracked 729 participants from 1996 to 2008, 111 deaths, 37 cardiovascular, 34 cancer. Higher emotional suppression at the 75th percentile versus 25th percentile associated with 35% increased all-cause mortality risk. The researchers concluded that emotional suppression may increase risk of earlier death, particularly from cancer. Further research needed to clarify mechanisms. Over decades, this dissonance becomes disease. The question isn't whether suppression harms you. The data on that is conclusive. The question is whether you'll believe the data enough to change the pattern. To risk saying not fine when every childhood lesson taught you, fine is the only safe answer. The research says the risk is worth it. That honesty might feel like death, but suppression is definitely killing you. Just slowly enough that you've learned to call it living. A 2023 archive containing saliva samples from chronic suppressors and direct communicators, cortisol levels at baseline, inflammatory markers, immune cell counts. The samples sit in frozen storage at Pennsylvania State University, waiting for the next study. The next attempt to quantify what the body already knows. That silence has a sound. It's the rhythm of a heart working too hard. The whisper of inflammation spreading through tissue. The quiet shutdown of immune defenses. The slow erosion of the space between what you feel and what you say until nothing remains but the lie you've learned to live.